What came to mind for me was this very brief, very civil Twitter debate I got into with David French. And, you know, we all love David, but David, I really feel, has not corrected for the mistake he made in basically rejecting Trumpism. Never mind Trump. You don't have to like Trump, but Trump was the voice of the people. And in one of his guises, Trump was the voice of the people. And David never really corrected to understand that. And somehow he is just kind of, I don't think he is reasoning in the real world anymore, you know. And he keeps saying that, oh, you know, Twitter has the right to ban you. It's a private entity. Amazon has the right to ban you. Well, finally, Amazon took down a book by the conservative scholar Ryan Anderson. It was called When Harry Became Sally, and we were talking about this on Backstage, that it was a very civil book, but basically criticizing transgenderism. And, you know, transgenderism is a dishonest idea, the idea that a man who thinks he's a woman is the same as a woman who thinks she's a woman. That's ridiculous. But it now was part of a change in policy, a very quiet change in policy that Amazon did, where they used to have a policy against hate speech, but books were exempt because books have a chance to unfold ideas and unfurl ideas. They still have Mein Kampf up there, and they should have it up there. They should have all kinds of speech up there. But suddenly they're taking down books. Meanwhile, two Congress people from California, Jerry McNerney and Anna Eshoo, have been writing to about a dozen big-time media people, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Verizon, Roku, AT&T, Apple, Tim Cook, Comcast, and all these other places, and sending them it's basically a threatening letter saying, why are you still carrying Fox News and Dish and Newsmax? And basically, why are you carrying these things? And you know, have you done anything to stop them from spreading disinformation? 2 days after they sent that, I think they sent the letter on Monday, 2 days after that, the Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing about, quote, disinformation and extremism in conservative media. And Representative Mike Doyle, chair of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, declared in opening remarks that, quote, it is the responsibility of the subcommittee to hold these institutions, meaning the press, to hold these institutions to a higher standard. It is the responsibility of Congress to stop the press from spreading conservative information, from conservative ideas. This is what the government is saying. So now you have the government intimidating or colluding with media companies who are colluding with each other to restrict American speech, all right? Now, when this happened, anything like this, when Donald Trump just insulted the press under the Trump administration, lunatic Keith Olbermann said this is cut 30.
Freedom of speech is the purpose of the United States of America. And every time this country's government has tried to alter that fact or has ignored it in the slightest, it has met with disaster.
Now, to be fair, when Keith Olbermann heard about these letters and these hearings, he issued this tape. This is cut 25.
I don't care what they may think of me.
Yeah, exactly. He's a grifter. It's a grift. So David French says we can't do anything about this because the government can't tell Amazon what books to sell because it is a private entity. So I pointed this out. Here is my argument, all right? The Declaration of Independence is the philosophical underpinning of the Constitution. It is not law in and of itself, but it is a statement of the beliefs of the founders of this country. On those beliefs, the Constitution was formed. And the Declaration says it is a self-evident truth that we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted among men to secure those rights. And we know that they held freedom of speech a lot higher than Keith Olbermann did because they made protection of freedom of speech from the government the First Amendment, okay? The First Amendment ensures that the government won't hamper the right to free speech, the rights to other rights, the rights to life and liberty and worship and all this. But it doesn't mean that that's the only threat. The government is instituted among men to secure those rights given to you by God. That is the philosophy on which the Constitution is based. That is the statement of purpose that the founders gave us, right? So if it has to secure those rights from private entities that are now so powerful that they have the power of governments and the wealth of governments and are acting in collusion with other powerful entities, so essentially they're unstoppable and unget-aroundable, right? It is part of the reason we have a government to secure our rights from those private entities. I mean, that just to me is simple logic. So let me just show you, we're talking about critical thinking. Let me show you some of the answers that I got on Twitter. And these were not answers from dopes. These were answers from reasonable people who were making what they thought were arguments. David himself said, no, the First Amendment protects private citizens from the government. That is true, but the government is instituted among men to secure God-given rights. That's the axiom of the country, right? So it's there to protect us from each other too, right? And you cannot say that you have the right to free speech if you can only sell your book that has the right-wing point of view on a street corner, while the left-wing point of view can sell it on Amazon, through Google Books, through Barnes & Noble, through any other way that you can sell it. It is absolutely absurd, especially when you have the government pushing these gigantic entities simply did not exist before. And now when they exist and when they're in collusion, it is monopolistic. All right. And by the way, I don't mean to sell David short. David French fought for free speech on campus. He is an attorney. He knows what he's talking about. He's pointing out something important, which there is a slippery slope of giving the government the right to tell Jeff Bezos what he has to sell on his site, and having the government tell you what you can say and do. So he's absolutely right that there's a slippery slope, but that doesn't mean the government doesn't have a responsibility to get off that slippery slope and still protect us from these monopolies and from these incredibly powerful people. There's got to be a way, when they can take Parler off the air by just eliminating their servers, there has got to be a way that people can not just get online, but can get online in a reasonably competitive way with Amazon and with other major sites. And this idea, other things that people said were like, oh, here's the capitalist arguing against capitalism. Well, as you know, I am a capitalist, definitely, but my capitalism comes second to my values and my rights. And of course it does. Of course it does. It has to start with your God-given rights. You don't have God-given rights to have to be a capitalist. You have capitalism in order to maintain your God-given rights. Everything that you do is to maintain, everything that government does, everything that we do with each other should be to help maintain these God-given rights. So here are some other things that people said, right? While their freedoms are being taken away from them, by these guys who are sitting on these mountains of gold. Tim Cook is sitting on these mountains of gold and says, yes, you shall have free speech. And no, not you, my friend. I'm sorry, not you. That's what these guys are doing now. And these are transnational corporations. They have no inherent loyalty to this country. They have no inherent presence in this country. They can take their headquarters anywhere they want. They're being funded from there's an Amazon in every country in the world. These are not necessarily American companies. And so there's Americans who are suffering from them, and American rights and American standards, which are different from all the standards all over the world. And they are not necessarily inherently American companies. Another argument somebody said, now do Masterpiece Cakeshop. In other words, if we can force Jeff Bezos on Amazon to carry a book that he doesn't want to carry, why can't we face the cupcake shop in Colorado to bake a cake for a gay ceremony that he doesn't believe in, a gay marriage that he opposes religiously? I assume that this person is talking about the Masterpiece Cakeshop, that is a transnational bakery which sells up to 90% of the cupcakes in the world. I mean, Amazon, it's very hard to know what percentage of books Amazon sells, because their books are sold in Walmart and in drugstores and things like that. It's just hard to keep those numbers. But at least one estimate is that they sell 83% of the books in this country. If the person who sells 83% of the books in this country can cancel a book, that is inherently censorship, especially when the government is backing them up and arguing with them to do that. So the Masterpiece Cakeshop thing is like, it must have sounded good to the guy when he tweeted it, but it's absurd. It's an absurd comparison, I mean, if Masterpiece Cakeshop sold 90% of the cupcakes in America, I would say, yes, you have to serve gay people. I don't care. You have to have a little division that's your not religious division so they can get a cake, because if they can't get a cake anywhere else, the fact is you can get in your car and you can drive 10 miles to another cake shop and get your cake. And that is competition, and that's fair trade, and that's freedom. The other one I got was this. This is like the argument against gun rights, because in other words, I'm saying just the way people who hate gun rights say, well, they wanted you to have a flintlock, but now you can have a machine gun. That's the same thing. What I'm saying is, oh, they protected free speech for bookstores, but not for Amazon because it's much bigger. But that's absurd. The reason you have gun rights is that so states can form militias to fight the federal government if the federal government illegally invades. That is why you have gun rights. It's so states can protect their state rights against the federal government. And if you don't think they can do that, take a look at Afghanistan. Guerrilla fighting can do a lot. You can do a lot fighting a guerrilla war. Obviously it's a horrible idea. It's the last thing you want to have happen. But in the extreme case, that's why you have gun rights. If the army were still using flintlocks, then I would say, yes, you can restrict us to flintlocks, but the army is using high-tech weapons. We can have weapons just as well. So in other words, the idea is it's not the guns. It was never the guns. It's the rights. It's the rights. So it's not, government can't stop people from speaking freely because government is bad. It's because no one should be able to stop you from speaking freely. It's the rights come first. But here's the big one, and this is the one that really disturbed me because it's so prevalent even on the right, and even especially on the right, I think. We're hearing this more and more. When I said, a couple of people answered, when I said we are endowed by our Creator with rights, people said, no, that's untrue. There is no Creator. There is no God. God is just a superstition. We were not endowed by our Creator with rights. See, that is half smart. That's half smart because the fact is we live in a system. It is a great system. It is the system that has made people freer than they have ever been any place, anywhere, any time in human history. And that system is based on a philosophy, and that philosophy is stated directly in the Declaration of Independence. I read it as I started talking about this. It is stated directly in the Declaration of Independence. You can say you don't believe in Christianity. You can say you don't believe in Judaism. You can say you don't believe in Islam. You can say you don't believe in God, but you have to believe in the Creator of the Declaration, or you no longer are living in America. It is a self-evident truth. When they say, I hold these truths to be self-evident, that's what's called an axiom. That is the unprovable fact on which the entire system is based, right? It's like saying two things that are equal to another thing are equal to each other. That is an axiom. You can't prove it, but it is true, and all the rest of mathematics and logic is based on those things. And that's why I was really interested at this exchange, and I will end with this, but on this subject, I was really interested in this exchange that happened as they were passing this absurd Equality Act, which I was talking about in the opening. I'll talk about a little more. And this congressman got up and said that saying that a man is not a man and a woman is not a woman is essentially going against the rule of God. Here is his speech. And at the end of this is Greg Stu from Florida. And at the end of this, Jerry Nadler, the guy who perpetrated the Russian collusion hoax, responds to him. Here it is.
Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences. And I think we are seeing the consequences of rejecting God here in our country today. And this bill speaks directly against what is laid out in Scripture. Our government, through this bill, is going to redefine what a woman is and what a man is. It can be anyone who identifies in that gender.
Mr. Stubbe, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
So God, for Jerry Nadler, as we can tell by the way he behaves, is no concern for this Congress. And, I can understand why you'd say that. I mean, obviously, like if God were angry at us, he'd send it like a pandemic to punish us. But that's not going to happen. Anyway, these people have not thought this through. And David French has not thought it through. He's thinking in an old way. He is thinking in an old way about old threats. The thing that the founders were trying to do was protect your freedom of speech. That's what they were trying to do. And if that threat is coming from colluding gigantic multinational corporations who are being spurred on by the government, that's the threat we have to be protected against. That is critical thinking in a new century where we happen to be.